In a desperate act, driven by the fear of his own imminent death, King Charles made a final, shocking move. He secretly handed control of Buckingham Palace to William and Catherine, a silent abdication that not only betrayed his own wife, but confessed his deepest fear: that his entire reign was a failure. In a move that sent shockwaves through the ancient heart of the British monarchy, King Charles III secretly ceded control of Buckingham Palace to William and Catherine. According to sources embedded deep within the palace walls, this was no grand affair of state, no televised ceremony marked by pomp and circumstance. It was a clandestine transfer, a chilling transaction conducted in a quiet chamber far from the prying eyes of the world and, most shockingly, from key members of the royal family itself. For generations, the golden gates of Buckingham Palace have been more than a barrier. They are a symbol of unyielding power, a fortress protecting the crown's secrets while projecting an image of divine stability. To hold the keys to the palace is to hold the operational reins of the monarchy, the very soul of the institution. This transfer was not merely symbolic, it was a seismic shift in power, a quiet coup orchestrated by the king himself against the traditions he swore to uphold. Those few trusted aides who witnessed the devastating event described a scene heavy with a dark, historical weight. There was no balcony wave, no national address, only the suffocating silence of a dynasty in crisis. In an act that defied centuries of protocol, King Charles handed the Prince and Princess of Wales the very nervous system of the monarchy. The decision was so sudden, so secretive, that even the king's closest advisors were left reeling, their faces pale with the terrifying implications of what they had just seen. Charles III, a man who waited a lifetime in the wings, has never been known for impulsivity. His entire life has been a study in patient deference. This covert act, therefore, speaks not of strategy, but of a terrifying urgency, a sense that time itself is running out. For many inside the palace, it is a devastating sign that the king's grip on the throne is unraveling far faster than anyone has dared to admit. His health, long the subject of palace whispers and carefully worded statements, now dictates his every move, forcing his hand in a final, desperate gambit. This was not the act of a confident sovereign securing his line of succession. This was the move of a haunted man, cornered by his own mortality, making a last brutal choice to save his family's legacy from what he fears is his own impending failure. The midnight coronation was complete, and the true, chilling cost was yet to be revealed. The keys that King Charles passed to his son and daughter-in-law were not mere metal. They were relics, heavy with the ghosts of monarchs past, each one a testament to centuries of duty, sacrifice, and the relentless burden of the crown. According to one witness, Charles's hands trembled as he presented them, not from physical weakness, but from the crushing significance of the moment. He was not just transferring authority, he was passing on the sacred legacy of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and confessing the unspoken, terrifying truth: the very survival of the Windsor dynasty now rested entirely on the shoulders of William and Catherine. But it was the king's quiet fragility that was the most telling. This was not the act of a powerful monarch securing his lineage, but of a father, a husband, and a son grappling with his own mortality. His voice, though low, was laced with an authority born of pure desperation. He was trying to save something precious before it was lost forever. The silence in that chamber was profound, punctuated only by the gravity of what was left unsaid. And in that silence, one absence screamed louder than any proclamation. The biggest bombshell of all was not who was in the room, but who was brutally left out. Queen Camilla, the woman who shares his throne, the woman for whom he risked everything, was deliberately and icily excluded from this pivotal decision. This omission was a jaw-dropping revelation in itself. To the few courtiers watching from the shadows, it revealed a deep and chilling rift at the very heart of the monarchy, a fundamental, irreparable lack of trust. It was as if the king was tacitly admitting that the wife he fought the world to marry could not be a part of the future he was so desperately trying to build. This was more than a handover. It was a confession. It was a warning that the monarchy stands on a precipice, and in the king's own estimation, only William and Catherine possessed the strength to pull it back from the brink. The message was clear and cruel. His queen, the partner of his life, was now a liability to his legacy. Behind every crown lies the fear of a fading legacy, the private terror of being the monarch who let it all crumble. For King Charles, this fear has become a waking nightmare. The secret transfer of the palace keys was a desperate, strategic bet against time, an enemy he knows he cannot defeat. His lifelong dream of the throne, the one thing he waited his entire existence to achieve, has soured into a daily battle against his own physical limitations and the relentless scrutiny of a world that has always questioned his suitability for the role. In private conversations with his most trusted aides, Charles has allegedly confessed the dark truth the public has long suspected. He does not believe he will live to see a smooth and steady transition of power to William. He is haunted by the specter of his reign being remembered as nothing more than a brief, unsteady interregnum between two titans, his mother, the unshakable Queen Elizabeth II, and his son, the future king. He fears his chapter in the history books will be a footnote, defined not by what he accomplished, but by how quickly it ended. This profound sense of mortality has reshaped his relationship with Prince William. Their conversations, held behind the closed doors of the king's private study, have shifted from those of a monarch and his heir to those of a dying father pleading with his son. He sees in William not just a successor, but his only chance at redemption, the one person who can secure the monarchy and validate his own fraught, embattled reign. Handing over operational control was, therefore, a frantic act of preservation. He chose to pass the torch deliberately, to project an image of continuity and strength, rather than waiting for it to be snatched away by public doubt or family rivals when he is too weak to resist. It was the last move of a king who knows the game is almost over. While Catherine and William accepted the keys to their future, Queen Camilla sat in silence, her authority dissolving before her very eyes. Though she wore the crown in that quiet, devastating ceremony, she was rendered powerless, an outsider in her own kingdom. Her absence from the handover was not an oversight. It was a calculated message, a brutal public humiliation delivered in the most private of settings. For Camilla, the blow was both personal and historic. She had fought for decades to ascend to the throne, enduring an inferno of public scorn as the other woman, surviving a constant barrage of betrayal rumors, and finally grasping the crown she believed was forever beyond her reach. And then, at the very apex of her victory, she was sidelined, barred from the very act that would define the monarchy's destiny. Sources close to her describe the shock as nothing short of catastrophic. She had spent years meticulously crafting a new image, seeking to be seen as a legitimate queen, not a scandalous mistress. With a single secret act, Charles had validated her deepest, most haunting fear. In the grand narrative of the Windsor dynasty, she was not the future. She was merely a placeholder, a transitional figure keeping the throne warm until Catherine, the people's chosen queen, was ready. According to unconfirmed reports from domestic staff, the aftermath was volcanic. Slammed doors and furious words echoed through her private apartments, the raw, animal sound of a soul betrayed. She had stood by Charles through years of public hatred and the heartbreaking, endless comparisons to Princess Diana. She had foolishly, naively believed her crown would finally shield her from dismissal. Instead, she was cast aside, a stark reminder that in the ruthless calculus of royalty, love is often the first casualty in the war for legacy. Her long, brutal fight for acceptance had ended not in triumph, but in the ultimate, most personal form of rejection. The king had made his choice, and in doing so, had declared her utterly disposable. The king's decision did not just marginalize his wife, it drew a brutal line in the sand, dividing the House of Windsor into two warring camps. On one side stood William and Catherine, the anointed saviors, the future of the crown. On the other, a queen consort, seething with a sense of profound injustice, her rage a palpable force within the palace walls. The unspoken war had begun. Camilla's allies, those courtiers who had tied their fortunes to her long and arduous climb, immediately began to mobilize. Their whispers of indignation turned into a quiet but organized resistance. They viewed the king's choice not as an act of a desperate father, but as a deliberate and cruel humiliation, a signal to the world that Catherine was the true defender of the crown, while Camilla was merely a temporary chapter in a long history. This was not symbolism, it was strategy. They saw a calculated move by a weakened king to bolster his popular daughter-in-law at the expense of his own wife, a cold-blooded political sacrifice. The conflict forced Charles into an impossible position, caught between his duty to the monarchy and his loyalty to the woman for whom he once risked everything. The tragic irony was devastating. The man who had once shattered tradition and endured public scorn to marry her was now the architect of her silent downfall, prioritizing the survival of the institution over her place within it. The tension between the king and queen is said to be a palpable poison, a cold war waged in hushed tones and icy glances across the dinner table. But those who know Camilla understand that silence is never her final word. She is a survivor, a woman who has been underestimated her entire life, who fought her way out from the shadow of Diana to claim a throne. Beneath her wounded pride, a fierce and dangerous determination burned to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. She began to weigh her alliances, to strategize her next move, and to seek ways to remind both the palace and the public that she is still the queen. For Camilla, the game was not over. It had just entered its most perilous stage. As the shock of Camilla's brutal exclusion reverberated through the palace, a toxic counter-narrative began to form, planted by those loyal to the scorned queen. Whispers turned into venomous accusations, suggesting that this was not a king's desperate act, but a meticulously planned coup orchestrated by an ambitious Princess of Wales. In this twisted new version of events, Catherine was painted not as a reluctant savior, but as a shrewd and ruthless operator who had masterfully maneuvered her way into power, callously exploiting the king's frailty for her own gain. Suddenly, her years of quiet dignity and unwavering duty were reframed as a long game, a calculated and cynical performance designed to win the public's trust and eclipse her rivals. These stories, dripping with insinuation, were designed to sow discord and undermine the very legitimacy of the handover. They portrayed Charles as a man under pressure, a pathetic figure coerced into a decision that went against his heart, with Catherine as the puppet master pulling the strings. This narrative was particularly damaging because it preyed on old, deep-seated insecurities within the royal establishment. The suspicion of the commoner who had risen too high, too fast. The strategic leak of these insidious rumors to select media outlets was nothing short of a declaration of war. It was a calculated attempt by Camilla's camp to tarnish Catherine's saintly image and recast her public adoration as the product of ruthless ambition. The battle for the monarchy's future was no longer being fought in private chambers. It had spilled out into the open, becoming a vicious and public war of perception. Every story planted, every anonymous quote given, was a shot fired in a conflict that threatened to tear the royal family apart from the inside, pitting a wounded queen against the woman who now held the keys to the kingdom. The secret ceremony was more than a transfer of power. It was a final, brutal declaration of exile for those royals already pushed to the margins. For Prince Andrew, the disgraced Duke of York, stripped of his titles and banished from public life, the news of William and Catherine's ascension was the last nail in his royal coffin. He saw it not just as a strategic decision, but as a deeply personal betrayal by his own brother. In private, he raged against a modernized monarchy that had no place for him, his fury hardening into a cold, resentful resolve. The disgrace was absolute, and with every channel of influence now permanently severed, his whispers of discontent grew sharper, his desire to remind the family of his existence becoming a dangerous obsession. He was not alone in his anger. His daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, long treated as loyal but peripheral members of the family, felt the sting of their increasing irrelevance. The monarchy was constricting into an ever tighter circle, and they were now firmly, irrevocably on the outside. Their father's hollow assurances of their importance were exposed as a lie. The door had been slammed shut, and their quiet disappointment curdled into a bitter resentment that echoed their father's own. Across the Atlantic, in the sunny isolation of Montecito, California, the news landed with the force of a final judgment. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the ceremony was undeniable proof of their permanent estrangement. It was a clear, cold message. You are no longer part of us. The exclusion extended to their children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, now effectively barred from the institution's inner sanctum. For Harry, who felt a deep and abiding sense of betrayal by his father, Catherine's elevation was a particularly bitter pill to swallow, a final, painful confirmation that the path he had chosen had led to a point of no return. The outcasts were gathering, united by their shared sense of rejection. King Charles had not merely passed the keys to his heir, he had carved a definitive line in the sand, fracturing his kingdom along lines of loyalty and blood. On one side stood William and Catherine, the chosen successors. The future? On the other side languished the forgotten, the resentful, and the disillusioned royals whose lineage was now deemed secondary to the institution's survival. This act of brutal pragmatism reinforced a generational divide and ignited long-simmering tensions into open hostility. The danger of a united front of outcasts became terrifyingly real. With every bitter whisper and shared grievance, the seeds of rebellion began to sprout within the palace walls. The first act of this rebellion was almost certainly the leak. Who else but a disgruntled royal with nothing left to lose would dare to expose such a sensitive, damaging secret? The disclosure of the clandestine ceremony was widely seen as a calculated act of sabotage, designed to damage the very institution that had cast them aside. It was an attempt to turn the king's strategic move into a public relations disaster, to frame the handover not as a sign of strength, but as evidence of a palace in chaos. The exiles, once divided by their own scandals and personal grievances, now had a common enemy. The silent coronation of William and Catherine had given them a shared purpose: to undermine the new order before it could fully establish itself. The monarchy was no longer just battling public opinion. It was facing an insurgency from within its own ranks, a fifth column of embittered relatives determined to prove that a crown divided cannot stand. The treachery of blood is the deepest cut of all, and the House of Windsor was bleeding from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. As the palace corridors digested the king's shocking decision, a powerful truth emerged. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had not just received a set of keys. She had been informally crowned the queen the people had already elected. This moment was the culmination of a long and arduous journey from an outsider once cruelly dubbed Whitey Katie to the monarchy's most indispensable asset. For years, she weathered the storms of royal scandals, tabloid attacks, and the relentless pressure of public scrutiny. While others stumbled and fell, she remained a symbol of grace and stability. Through the turmoil of the Sussexes' bitter departure and the humiliation of Prince Andrew's downfall, Catherine became the monarchy's anchor, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her. It was this unwavering steadiness that earned her the one thing no crown can bestow: the trust of the British people. Poll after poll confirmed her status as the most respected and beloved senior royal. She was seen not merely as a princess, but as a queen in waiting who embodied the perfect fusion of tradition and modernity. King Charles, for all his pride, could not ignore this reality. He recognized, perhaps reluctantly, that Catherine's ability to connect with the public was more vital to the monarchy's survival than his own fragile reign. By placing the keys in her hands alongside William's, he was making a strategic concession. He was acknowledging that she was not just a supportive spouse, but a non-negotiable asset, the true heir to Queen Elizabeth's legacy of quiet strength. In one silent gesture, bereft of pomp or proclamation, Catherine's destiny was sealed. The keys she now held were a symbol of a fate she had already earned in the hearts of the people, a coronation by popular demand that no official ceremony could ever rival. In the turbulent waters between Charles's waning rule and William's imminent reign, one figure stands as an unshakable beacon of tradition: Princess Anne. The Princess Royal, long the stoic workhorse of the monarchy, has always been the quiet, steely force behind the crown, a living embodiment of her mother's mantra of duty first. As whispers of betrayal and rebellion threatened to engulf the palace, Anne emerged as the silent guarantor of Queen Elizabeth II's legacy. Her conviction was not born of ambition, but of a profound sense of custodianship. In her final private conversations with her mother, the late queen had reportedly expressed immense admiration for Catherine's quiet resilience, suggesting that the future of the kingdom might one day rest on her shoulders. Anne took these words not as casual remarks, but as a sacred instruction, a quiet passing of the torch. Her presence at the secret handover was no accident. She was there not merely as a witness, but as a protector, ensuring the transfer of power was seen as a continuation of her mother's will, not a sign of the king's weakness. Her tacit approval was a powerful message to any doubters. If Anne endorsed this move, then Elizabeth's legacy did too. This subtle but unmistakable validation was also a quiet, chilling warning to Queen Camilla. By standing with her brother and nephew, Anne communicated a hard truth. Catherine's ascendancy was a matter of destiny, not palace politics. Any resistance would be futile against a woman who now embodied the full sacred authority of the beloved late queen. Anne, the keeper of the flame, had made her choice, and in doing so, she had solidified the new world order, leaving Camilla utterly isolated in her rage. In the aftermath of the transfer, as William grappled with the terrifying new weight on his shoulders, Princess Anne allegedly made him a solemn and powerful pledge. She promised him that as long as she lived, she would stand as a bulwark, ensuring the monarchy he inherited would survive his rule. Her words were more than a promise of support. They were a lifeline, a blunt reminder that he was not alone. In Anne, William saw a direct link to his grandmother, a source of the same unyielding strength and wisdom that had guided the crown for 70 years. She became his confidant, the one person with whom he could share the burden without fear of judgment. This bond between the aging guardian of tradition and the young king-in-waiting became the new, secret foundation of the monarchy's power. Anne's role was to be the institutional memory, the keeper of the flame, while William and Catherine became the modern face of the crown. Her endorsement neutralized much of the internal opposition. It sent a clear message that this was not a reckless break from the past, but a necessary evolution, sanctioned by the person who best understood Queen Elizabeth's vision. For William, Anne's unwavering loyalty was the anchor he desperately needed. It gave him the confidence to face the storm gathering around him, knowing that the spirit of his grandmother, channeled through her most devoted daughter, would always be there to protect him and the throne he was now destined to defend. It was a blood oath, a sacred promise between the last true link to the past and the monarchy's only hope for the future. Royal secrets are a currency, and they rarely stay buried for long. Within days of the clandestine ceremony, whispers escaped the palace walls and ignited a media maelstrom that put the monarchy on the defensive. The leak, believed to have originated from the embittered camp of exiled royals, spread like wildfire. What was intended as a quiet act of preservation was now being publicly dissected as a sign of chaos and instability. Anonymous sources fed the press a cocktail of truth and rumor. Newspapers ran sensational headlines about a shadow handover, a king preparing to step aside, and a palace in disarray. Television pundits debated the constitutional implications. Was this a quiet abdication, a confession of defeat in the face of the king's deteriorating health? Buckingham Palace's official response was a study in obfuscation. While they denied any formal transfer of constitutional authority, unnamed advisers conceded that Charles was increasingly sharing duties with his son and daughter-in-law. This carefully worded non-denial only fueled the fire, reinforcing the public perception that something monumental had indeed occurred. The silence from the palace was deafening, creating a vacuum that was quickly filled by a global chorus of speculation. The king's gambit had backfired spectacularly. Instead of projecting strength and continuity, the secrecy of the act had made the monarchy appear vulnerable, fractured, and ruled by clandestine dealings. The court of public opinion was now in session, and the crown was on trial for its very life. The secret had been unveiled, and the consequences were proving to be utterly devastating. The media frenzy was exacerbated by a flood of competing narratives emerging from within the palace itself. Camilla's camp, stung by her public sidelining, allegedly launched a vicious counteroffensive, planting stories that painted a very different picture of the events. Whispers emerged of a power-hungry Catherine who had ruthlessly schemed her way to the top of a frail king pressured into a decision he now regretted. These stories cast Catherine as an ambitious usurper, grasping for a power she was never meant to hold so soon. Whether true or not, this toxic narrative succeeded in dividing the public and tarnishing her carefully cultivated image of selfless duty. On social media, the battle lines were drawn. Supporters hailed Queen Catherine as the modern face of royalty, the true heir in all but name. Detractors, however, questioned the brutal dismissal of Camilla and the sinister secrecy surrounding such a momentous decision. The digital battlefield became as vicious as the one being fought within the palace walls. The monarchy was now under siege, not only from external media, but from its own internal factions. The carefully constructed facade of unity had crumbled, revealing a royal house at war with itself. The leak had done more than expose a secret. It had exposed the deep, festering wounds of jealousy, ambition, and betrayal that lay just beneath the gilded surface of royal life. The crown was now fighting a multi-front war, struggling to control a narrative that had spiraled catastrophically out of its hands. For years he had been the stoic heir, trained from birth to bear the weight of the crown without complaint. But in the private moments after receiving the keys to Buckingham Palace, Prince William reportedly confessed the terrifying extent of his burden. To Catherine and a handful of his closest friends, his regal composure fractured, revealing a man on the precipice of a destiny he feared he was not ready for. "Am I ready for this?" he is said to have asked. His voice choked with a vulnerability that stunned those present. He admitted that despite a lifetime of preparation, the sheer magnitude of what was to come felt overwhelming. He spoke of his father's increasing frailty, of private conversations that hinted at a retirement far sooner than anyone expected. The abstract concept of inheriting the throne had suddenly become a chillingly immediate reality. With the palace keys in his hand, the full weight of history seemed to close in on him, and the fear of failure gnawed at his soul. In that moment of profound weakness, it was Catherine who stood as his rock. She reminded him that his reign would not be carried by one man, but by the partnership they had built over 2 decades. Her serenity was his anchor. She assured him that the true power of the monarchy lay in the trust of the people, a trust he had already earned. Yet the internal battle raged on. He confessed his deepest fear, that the crown would take from his children what it had taken from him, a life free from the suffocating glare of public scrutiny. The burden was not just the weight of a nation, but the crushing weight of a father's love for his children, and his terror at what their inheritance would truly cost them. Despite his crippling self-doubt, Prince William made a solemn vow that night, a commitment that cut through his uncertainty. He pledged to defend the monarchy, not for himself or for his father, but for his children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. He promised to preserve the throne so that when their time came, they would inherit an institution of stability and strength, not one of chaos and division. In this vow, those who heard it saw the heart of a true king. His vulnerability was not a sign of weakness, but of a profound humanity and a deep love for his family. His confession revealed a man not breaking under pressure, but reforging his purpose in the fires of adversity. He was no longer just the heir. He was a father fighting for his children's future. This raw, emotional honesty is what has always set William apart, what has made him the people's choice long before fate intervened. He embodies a new kind of leadership, one that is not afraid to admit fear, to show compassion, and to put family at the center of duty. The handover may have been his father's last desperate act, but it was in William's quiet, heartfelt pledge that the monarchy found its true path forward. The crown was no longer just a symbol of power, it was a sacred trust, a promise made from one generation to the next, sealed not in a grand ceremony, but in a moment of raw, human vulnerability. The public storm and internal warfare had an unintended consequence. It solidified William and Catherine's position as the monarchy's undisputed center of gravity. The king, by his own desperate admission, was now a transitional figure, his authority diminished with every passing day. The public, weary of the old guard scandals and bitter infighting, overwhelmingly rallied behind the Prince and Princess of Wales. They represented a fresh start, a vision of a modern, relatable monarchy that could navigate the treacherous waters of the 21st century. Inside the palace, the shift was palpable. Courtiers and staff, ever attuned to the winds of power, began to orbit the new Sunday. Decisions were increasingly deferred to William's judgment, and Catherine's influence on matters of public image and charity became paramount. Camilla's attempts to reassert her authority were largely ignored, her faction isolated and rendered impotent by the sheer force of public and institutional support for the new guard. This was not a hostile takeover, but a natural and inevitable transfer of power, accelerated by the king's own catastrophic actions. William and Catherine did not seize control. It was thrust upon them by a combination of their father's desperation and the overwhelming will of the people. They were now the de facto rulers, shouldering the daily responsibilities of the crown, while Charles retreated further into the shadows of his reign. The old order had crumbled, not with a bang, but with a quiet, decisive shift in allegiance that left the old queen raging in a kingdom that no longer listened. The secret handover of the palace keys was, in truth, King Charles's final act as a reigning sovereign. It was an abdication in all but name, a quiet, desperate surrender of the throne he had waited a lifetime to inherit. There would be no formal announcement, no grand speech to the nation. Instead, his reign would fade away in a slow, managed decline, his legacy defined by this one last, desperate attempt to save the institution he loved. In the aftermath, those who saw him described a man strangely at peace, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had passed his greatest burden to his son, and to the daughter-in-law he now recognized as the monarchy's true savior. He had done what he felt he must, prioritizing the crown's future over his own pride, and even over his own wife. As the palace gates gently closed on that fateful night, the sound echoed the end of an era. Charles's reign will forever be remembered as a brief, tumultuous bridge between two great epochs. Emotionally intelligent reign of the king and queen to come. He was the tragic king, a man whose ambition was ultimately thwarted by the cruel realities of time and fate. His final act was not one of weakness, but of a heartbreaking, pragmatic sacrifice. He chose to become a footnote in history to ensure that the story of the British monarchy would continue for one more generation. The monarchy had changed. In a quiet chamber, without the world's knowledge, an old king had effectively stepped aside, and a new king and queen had risen to take his place. The transfer of the keys was more than a practical handover. It was a ritual of succession, a silent acknowledgement that the future had arrived, whether they were ready for it or not. William and Catherine now stand at the helm of a fractured, embattled institution, their reign destined to be one of turbulence and transformation. The keys they hold are not a gift but a devastating burden, a constant reminder of the immense weight of expectation upon their shoulders. They must now navigate the treacherous currents of family betrayal, relentless public scrutiny, and a world that is increasingly skeptical of the very idea of monarchy. The ghost of Queen Elizabeth II's monumental reign looms large, a perfect, unassailable standard against which they will forever be measured and found wanting. The final, poignant irony is the most brutal of all. Charles, in his desperate attempt to secure a stable future, may have ushered in the monarchy's most perilous and unpredictable chapter yet. An era has ended, not with the tolling of a bell, but with the quiet, chilling click of a lock. The future of the House of Windsor is now in the hands of William and Catherine. Whether they can heal the wounds of the past and forge a crown strong enough to endure the coming storm remains the great, unanswered question. The story is far from over. In truth, the tragedy has only just begun.